I feel like an African queen, or maybe a British queen. Sure. Good afternoon to you all once again, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Rashida. I'm from Ghana. I am an entrepreneur, a consultant, and an ex-morning TV host. Now, I bet many of you are going to be wondering why she's adding an ex job. Well, that's because most of the media personnel here would agree or attest to the fact that waking up at 3 a.m. or 4 a.m. to go on TV could be harder than reporting from an ISIS concentration. Anyway, I'd like to speak to you of an issue that is no news to you in most West African countries. I'm here to talk to you on a very important issue, an issue you have been fighting for since your establishment. It is always refreshing to come across a group of people fighting for a common good or goal that is to the betterment of humanity and everyone else. I commend you, I'm talking about the UKIP, on taking on this issue of the EU and the implications of their actions on not just countries over here, but the rest of the world as well. It is even exciting to know that people of your country are going to have to weigh in on this very issue in the forthcoming referendum. Thank you very much once again. When I first set out to give out this speech, I was wondering what lines exactly I was supposed to have been towing. Then I said to myself, well, it won't be worth it. Maybe you should just be bringing out the real facts on the ground to make people realize what EU could just be doing to not just Britain or the UK, but the rest of the world. Ladies and gentlemen, you know the EU and its workers better than I do. That I must confess. But a review of the history of the EU will reveal that it was originally set up after the World War II to strengthen trade amongst member countries with a view to boosting economic development. The question we ask today in Africa, which I believe many of you have asked as well, is what exactly is the business Africa has got to do with the EU? We will answer this question shortly as part of my presentation. The title of your conference could not have been more interesting for an African like me. You want the UK out of the EU. Granted, what could be wrong with that? If it is great to integrate and do business with a few countries, why will it not be awesome to do the business with the entire world? I will let you guys ponder over this answer. Probably at the end of my presentation, we're going to be finding a bigger answer to it. As an up-and-coming African entrepreneur, I have been interested in trade for a very long time. I've come to the realization that it is our guaranteed source of an upliftment out of poverty, and I'm talking about Africa. For trade to be meaningful, though, it has to be between among equal partners. That is where I have a difficulty actually with the operations of the UKIP. Clearly, it's just to say that there's supposed to be a mutual benefit in all trade activities. Remember our earlier question about why an African like me will be bothered by the operations of the EU? This is your answer. The EU is no longer an organization that is just interested in the economic advancement of European countries. I shudder to say that in the furtherance of some of the EU's goals, the unintended consequences, or should I say the intended consequences on Africans like me, are real and pretty direct. Some of the ways the EU has decided to strengthen our economy or our member countries, including granting them an unfettered access, or your member countries actually, including granting them an unlimited access to African markets. This access, whereas is good for European countries or some European countries, is a zero-sum game. As Europeans gain, Africa continues to wallow in poverty while losing. The EU may not have intended this consequence, but that is the reality on the ground. When was the last time any of you seated here actually had the chance to eat fufu? I was sure I was going to have a dead silence of an answer because not a single person, apart from maybe Alex, will know about fufu. Now, this is a delicacy Ghanaians simply can never do without, or Africans. Now, the next question is, when was the last time you actually had the chance to buy a smoke? I brought Nigel the smock from Africa, and I'm wondering, I'm not surprised he's not wearing it today because he doesn't even know what it is. Now, when I heard that I had to come do a presentation here, here is my list of the stuff I actually had to buy before coming in front of you this afternoon. A Kenneth Cole shoes, Victoria's Secret undies and makeup, probably make a breakfast this morning with sausages and the bacons and mushrooms and so much more. Now the question is, I had no choice because this was what was presented to me and that was what I had to patronize. The question now is, we win any competition against the EU at all? Never. We are not in competition. We are out for a fair trade deal that is actually supposed to be getting us out of poverty. The reality is we cannot. So if we were manufacturers of smokes, let's say in Africa, a young entrepreneur who, let's say, does smokes. I'll show you a picture of the smoke in a bit. That's if we have it here. I will be out of business in a very short period of time. This simple illustration is the reality of every single African entrepreneur if they're ready to tell you the genuine and gospel truth. Expansion of EU into Africa in its current form is not good for Africa. We accept the fact that we could not compete and win against the European countries or companies. Our governments therefore rely on tariffs and duties to even the playing field. Now, with some of the conditions the EU is setting up, our governments who rely on aid from EU countries have had to give up the duties and the tariffs. Folks, this did not only even the playing field for everybody, but it has also served as a major source of revenue for us to develop ourselves. It must be made clear that I am not against trade. I am an entrepreneur with open arms who will welcome any trade deal in as much as it's for a mutual benefit. I'm advocating for free and equal trade for all countries. The EU is currently not offering that. That I must confess. What the EU is offering is more market for EU members. As an African, I find this to be a complete failure and a future killer to an African economy. And this can only lead to more dependency on EU by Africans. I do not think that is good for even the EU itself. In Ghana, we have a saying that adepa ne ton ne hon. This clearly means that a good product does not need an aggressive marketing strategy to be able to sell on the market. It sells itself, which is the reason why I probably would have mentioned Kenneth Cole. It doesn't need too much advertising. Even on TV, when you watch the Rolex adverts, they don't say much about Rolex. They just tell you the time. And at the end of the advert, you get to understand that it's talking about Rolex. Now, the production standards, which is supposed to be the next line of action, standardization in Africa, especially on exports to EU countries. The fact of the matter is, even when the EU markets are open to us, the production standards and the quality demanded by EU markets makes it quite difficult for us to sell just about anything we produce in African countries. And if we are going to be losing at all times, then of course, the only way to get us to buy what the EU is selling is through compulsion. The loss of tariffs alone will cost Ghana somewhere between $100 and $400 million annually, statistics has proven. The United Nations estimated that international trade tariffs generated almost a third of total income for many sub-Saharan African countries. We lose a third of our country's total income, while the EU can take what they want to use for free and sell it back to us as finished products at a cheaper price. It also means the government has to find that lost income elsewhere, or cut back on public expenditure on health, education, and welfare, which has always been the problem or the bane to development of most African countries. But how can we fight AIDS? I'm talking about HIV. School our children, support businesses when we have lost 1/3 of our income. Here is a question I might demand an answer probably from the EU. The government must find these taxes in other forms, obviously, often from its own people. We're talking about ourselves. Ghana is expected to lose as much as $5 billion over the next 15 years due to the EPA, or as one calculation compared, the same as 50 high-tech hospitals. The Ghanaian Ministry of Trade itself has estimated it would directly threaten at least 43,000 jobs in Ghana alone, not just in Africa. Meanwhile, the EU pretends it's all for good. By boasting about being the biggest donor of international aid, the EU is able to bribe poorer countries into signing exploitative deals while continuing to pose as the good guy. Even this aid usually would come with a price. In return, the EU wants to finish our waters, impoverishing the entire coastal communities by trawling our once bountiful fish stocks. Another condition of getting aid is often to agree to attract more foreign investment. I'm a businesswoman, and I have always wanted to have international trade deals, for which reason I am not against trade deals at all. But Africa must not be bullied into selling off our resources to foreign banks and multinational companies. Thank you. The EU then uses the big stakes these foreign investors have in our markets to push for even better or more aggressive trade deals, to give even more access to our markets to foreign companies who then gain an advantage over domestic businesses. And this just reminds me of the regular saying in Ghana that domestic businesses have a shelf life of just 4 years. After 4 years, they fold up. Ideally not the situation, but this is what actually pertains on the ground as a result of the presence of the EU. And because the EU's EPA made no allowance for the World Trade Organization to be the arbiter of negotiations, the EU has appointed itself as the judge in any trade disputes under these economic partnership agreements, and uses its role as an aid donor and major investor to always get its own way around issues. Ladies and gentlemen, I could go on and on and on for days talking about the problems and real-life crisis that the EU has posed to not just Ghana, but Africa. Like I started by saying, I'm a proponent of trade. I believe it is our way of getting out of poverty in Ghana or in Africa. Aid and loans have shown over time that our countries cannot depend on them for development. It is only when we produce and sell and create jobs for our people that we can get out of poverty. The support of UKIP and other well-meaning Europeans can help get out of these issues and probably help us have a proper dialogue and effective communication with the European Union. You guys can help us make the EU serve us all better instead of otherwise, or the other way around. It will have to begin with you, and I'm talking about citizens of the United Kingdom, by first ensuring that you push enough to get out of the European Union to get back to your original purpose. Ladies and gentlemen, I like to believe the upcoming referendum should be used as your starting point. I wish you all the very success in your campaign for a cleaner humanity. And just before I go, I'd like to remind everybody sitting here that not just Ghana, but Africa, with open arms, is ready for great trade deals that is supposed to be having a mutual benefit and not aid. Thank you very much once again.